You can repeat it, Bob.
Uh, I'll add one more award I received. As a matter of fact, it's right over my shoulder here, if folks can see my screen. It's a humility award. I don't know why anyone gives out humility awards because it's not something I could brag about. But if you were close by, you'd see that it actually says humility on it. I don't know how that works, but there it is. I'm doing my screen share, so all of you should be able to see what I have up here.
Mhm.
We're going to be talking about helping families initiate and sustain recovery. Um, you know, Nancy last year asked me to do this presentation, and I just had one answer to that, and that was yes. It was yes for a lot of good reasons. I have known Nancy a long time, and I think she is an absolute gift to our field, especially here in Illinois. So that was a kind of no-brainer for me. But the other piece is very much about family recovery. Yeah, like Nancy, I've been around a long time. I started working with alcoholics in 1979. And we had some pretty good family programs at Grant Hospital in Chicago back at that time and into the 80s. But with managed care, we threw away a lot of those programs because of the downsizings we do with managed care. And somehow we neglected families despite all of our talk that family recovery was essential. And so whenever the issue of family recovery comes up, I'm very interested in coming up out of retirement and sharing my experiences and what hopefully can keep us back on track to taking care of families. So that's the spirit that I'm bringing today with you. You know a little bit about me now. Um, so I'd like to get to know a little bit about you, and you can put this in chat for me. That would be helpful. I'm not looking for your entire bio or resume, but I'm guessing some people are here because of their professional work. I think some people are here possibly because of their own personal issues around family recovery. And I certainly believe that there are a number of people out there who certainly can fit both of those descriptions. So if you're a professional, where do you work? I already saw a couple of those things popping up on chat. Um, if it's personal, just mention like one thing. I don't expect you to give me a laundry list of all the things you've done for your recovery, but one thing. And I'd love to get that up there because that way you all see a little bit about who's here with us. Because I'm looking at the PowerPoint, I can't see the chat, but Nancy, can you or Christine see the chat as they come in?
Yeah, I've got it open right now.
Excellent, excellent. So along the way, I'd just be kind of curious if there's some things that are special Nancy, if you're thinking something, either a question comes up that you think is important to answer
Right.
at that time, I'm open to that. Also, I'm curious as you see some people addressing what kind of mix there is between
Well, the
professional and
first one I
personal.
see is a CASA volunteer,
Oh,
which
very
I think
good.
is, yes, it is.
Excellent.
I'm going to be
Excellent.
doing some training with them here along the way. Professional parent educator with the parent place in Springfield. I'm familiar with that.
Hmm.
A forensic interviewer, DH or DCFS high risk intact,
Yes.
a caseworker, Gateway Foundation,
Excellent.
another parent place.
Okay. Good. Good. You know, actually, before everyone came on, Nancy and I were talking a little bit about different people who are working on some current projects who really don't have clinical backgrounds in this field. And, you know, we were describing that right now where we are as a profession, we need people with a lot of different skill sets
Right.
and coming from different perspectives. And, you know, that's in keeping with the idea of recovery-oriented systems of care too. You know, the idea is it's got to be a community response. So we're coming from a lot of different angles to really support the people who really need that kind of support. So excellent. I welcome one and all. Um,
There's a
This,
big variety. There is
good,
a huge variety of people
excellent.
from all areas.
That's certainly what I was hoping for.
Yeah.
Regarding learning objectives, these are 4 basic ones I have in mind. There are probably some things under each of them too. I'm going to have a very brief overview of, giving a key concepts that go into substance use disorders, and also taking a look at recovery as an ongoing process of change. That's part of the SAMHSA definition. And many of you probably already know this, but I really think anytime I'm doing a training or someone else is doing a training, it's good to put the training in context. So there's not going to be a lot of slides on it, but I really want to highlight a couple foundational ideas that we'll be going back to when we talk more specifically about families in recovery. So that's the first section. The next section is obstacles of family recovery. In an hour and a half webinar, one could leave here thinking, Bob's making it sound like it's really easy for families to recover. No. So I also thought it was important to talk about the many obstacles that families face. So we are going to start there. But I don't want to drown out the idea that people do recover by only talking about the obstacles. So I think the first 20 slides or so cover the recovery as an ongoing process and obstacles. And then the remaining slides, 250 of them, no, I'm just joking. There's not that many slides. The remaining slides really kind of talk into these next 2 areas. What key skills someone needs to develop, especially in early family recovery. And for me, I'm talking early recovery as the first few years. And then I really think it's crucial for us not only to talk about early recovery, but the importance of ongoing personal family recovery to keep the growth going. I think sometimes we lose track of families after they've reached some degree of stabilization. But I really think recovery is so much more than stabilization. So that's one of my premises that I want to put out front there for you. So that's what I have in mind for us. Yeah, I think I can move on. Actually, to be more precise, I know I was joking about the number of slides. We got about 48 slides. So I think there's a lot of material to cover, but I don't want to overwhelm you with too many slides in this hour and a half presentation. If you do have any hot and burning questions, you can put them in the chat and Nancy can get them to me and I'd be happy to do that. Otherwise, I'll also try to save a little time at the end of the presentation for any of your comments or questions. Since we started off with so many different things like the recording and stuff like that, I don't know if it was mentioned that you all are quite welcome to my PowerPoint slides. I have no problem with that. Anyone who wants that, Nancy and her team could get that out to you. So this is in that section of foundational ideas about substance use disorders and recovery. So these are the next few slides I'm going to talk about, just so you know where we're going, and then we're going to switch into the obstacles. Certainly along the way, I learned the phrase that substance use disorders can be seen as biopsychosocial disorders. I know in 1979, we were basically talking about the disease concept. I was working in a hospital-based program that really focused on disease and the abstinence model. And I think that since that time, we really broadened our understanding to look at the different levels to this, that yes, there's a biological component to substance use disorders. The chemicals that are used certainly affect the body, and not only physically, but as you see, psychologically, and because of attitudes and behaviors that affect everyone socially as well too. So I think there's values in keeping that broader mindset of biopsychosocial disorder. One of the foundational principles for me, and it's certainly part of DSM criteria, is continued use despite adverse consequences. I think when we boil down what a substance use disorder is, that is kind of a nucleus of it. You know, problems are happening, but for whatever reason, use continues and things get worse and worse, as you see here, if left untreated. We believe that the disease is progressive. Here I use the word disease again. Usually I say disorder. We believe the disorder is progressive, that over time, left untreated, the symptoms that people experience will get worse and worse. So that what looks like an early stage of the disorder looks very different after a number of years. And we'll see how that fits hand in glove with the concept of denial too. I also think that a key concept, as I said earlier, is that disorder is felt by family and others. I say others, actually with family, I use a pretty broad definition of what a family is. I don't think just like family of origin or nuclear family. I think that it could be coworkers, it could be friends, it could be a whole range of different people. And also some families, my mom was from Western Pennsylvania, and I had an uncle who was not a blood relative at all. He was just the best friend of my Uncle Don. So I had an extra uncle thrown in there, Uncle Lou. I would count Uncle Lou as part of my family, even though he wasn't blood. So keep that in mind too. There is those extended families that could have impact and are impacted by substance use disorders. Here's the SAMHSA definition. You know, SAMHSA is the feds, for those of you not familiar, Substance Abuse Mental Health Service Administration. And about 20 years ago, actually a little more than that now, we're sitting on 2025. Happy New Year to you all, by the way. They identified this definition to really kind of scope over substance use disorders as well as mental health disorders, since they manage both. A process of change through which individuals improve their health and wellness, live a self-directed life, and strive to reach their full potential. So what's interesting about this is there's no mention of abstinence in this. There's no mention that, you know, once you get sober, everything's okay. The fact that it's a process of change is very important because it shows this is an extended process. It just doesn't happen, say, during the course of treatment. There's nothing about treatment here as well, too. But it's really looking at what, through this process of change, what positive steps do we see? Improved health, wellness, self-directed life. Really means that you have some choice and options in your life that you can choose from, and really strive to reach our full potential. And we're going to talk a lot more when we talk about family recovery, the idea of finding new identities for who we are, finding a new sense of meaning in our lives. And all those, I think, fit into this idea of full potential, or as Maslow might have said, self-actualization. So we broaden ourselves in that way. SAMHSA also talks about 4 dimensions, and I'll only touch on this lightly because I think it helps flesh out that definition that they were just talking about. Health, and here they're describing both physical and mental health, that we're looking for signs of improvement in those areas. The degree of functioning that someone can do is, so in this case, recovery, this dimension of recovery is just not the absence of disorder, but it's movement toward health and wellness. Home is the stability and safety that could be found in someone's living situation. Purpose, you know, I talked just a moment ago about meaning. I think meaning is very important in one's lives. I'm going to refer to that a lot in recovery. And this idea of purpose, that we have a new sense of who we are and what our purpose or meaning is in our lives. And community. For community, it's about connections. And you can define community in many different ways. You may define community in your neighborhood, might be community in your town, it might be community in your church or other faith-based organization. Community can be in a 12-step organization. But whatever it is, and I think this is very important, I think it's more than a sense of connection. Over the years, I found myself talking about the importance of feeling connected to others. Well, I'd like to even, recent years, I've been thinking so much more about this personally too. It's more than just being connected, it's feeling like you belong. And that's a very powerful human experience, to know that you belong. So I think that ties into community very well. So that's the quick overview. We're done with that. We got obstacles coming up. Before you hear the ones that I chose, I'd kind of like to hear, well, see maybe better than hear, is some obstacles that you might consider. So just in chat, write down one or two that come to mind that might be very common obstacles for a family to face in the process of recovery. And I'll pause for a minute for you to work your fingers to type that in. And I just want to hear a few of them from Nancy as they come in, and then I'll move on.
Stigma, shame, relapse, lack of support, trauma,
Yeah.
limited resources,
Oh,
regaining
yeah.
trust.
We'll
Support.
talk about that. Yep.
Yeah. Resentments.
Oh, very good. I didn't have that one on my list, but that's very good.
Lack of family-specific support.
Uh-huh.
Children don't understand. We're getting into my area here.
That's right. That's right.
Distance and location.
Oh, yeah. In some areas, just the
Yes,
distance
especially in
between.
southern Illinois and parts of rural.
I hear that loud and clear.
Hurt feelings, generational issues.
Excellent. Excellent.
Yeah.
Thank you all for participating in that, because I knew the ones that I picked could be in there because I heard some of them, but I also knew I'd be limited because I can't talk about 36 different obstacles and still get around to the recovery side. So I heard
sometimes it's come up, lack of transportation and stuff though. So.
Yeah, that's a real barrier. It's an obstacle. It really is. Hopefully with this Zoom machine we have, it helps bridge some of that gap. But, you know, breathing the same air, being in the same room with someone, in person, hugs and all that stuff, that's something special. I've been in, I still am in 2 men's groups that have been meeting, one for 5 years, the other for 10. And we rely heavily on Zoom, but every once in a while we get together, and it's very important to get together. So my list, I'm going to be covering these 5 before moving to the recovery side. And some of them are ones that I heard you mention. I certainly heard stigma, shame, trauma in there. I'm adding denial in there, just as individuals with a substance use disorder have denial, so do family members. And I've also been studying a lot of unresolved grief. Mark Sanders.
I didn't see that listed, but I think I'm right in there with you.
Yeah. Mark Sanders and I did a workshop just a few months ago for the fall conference on grief. And it's been a subject that I've really taken a good hard look at, both personally and professionally in the past year or so. So we're going to talk about that a little bit. Stigma. Boy, you know, actually we could probably do the whole presentation on that. Like I said, I started in this field in 1979, and I know that we did a lot of public education on helping people understand, at that time, alcoholism, as I said, as a disease, to really try to overcome the stigma. But, you know, historically, it's been in our country for a long time because we've really criminalized public health issue. I'm listing here war on drugs, but it even goes back to that, like 100 years earlier. You know, we tried to deal with opioid addiction back in the early 20th century with the Harrison Act, making it illegal to have those substances, even though doctors were prescribing them. And actually, at one point in time, opioids were just over the counter; they weren't even prescribed. But we did that. We did the prohibition of alcohol. In a sense, we did the prohibition of cannabis with the Tax Act, Marijuana Tax Act in the 30s. So we've looked at public health issues and said we can control this by, getting the criminal justice system involved. That didn't work real well. The war on drugs that really started around the 80s, a little bit in the 70s, really became the war on drug users. Our incarceration rates mounted, and our society started really kind of seeing that anyone using drugs is a criminal. And there was some heavy stigmatization of that, especially in the time a little later when we had terrorist attacks and believed that selling drugs were supporting terrorists because terrorists were in the drug market and blah, blah, blah. I won't feed that much anymore, but it further stigmatized people. In the 80s, we also had Nancy Reagan saying, just say no, which seemed to think that, well, if you couldn't say no, you're weak-willed or immoral. And to a certain extent, and actually Bill White used to do a wonderful job of explaining this, that I understand why we came up with the slogan, treatment works. This is kind of circa late 80s into the 90s, because we wanted to let people know that they can come into treatment and get help. But treatment works seems to suggest that you come into treatment, you get fixed, and there's no more problem. It works. But then we have all these high relapse rates. So maybe someone's not working it right, or maybe we forgot that recovery is a lot more than treatment. So I think that one's a little more subtle, but it still plays into stigma. It still plays into the fact of oversimplifying a situation that has bio, psycho, social components to it. And unfortunately, all that judgment, negative judgment, goes not only on the individual with the substance use disorder, but extends to families, especially parents, especially when we're looking at younger drug users. It's the parents carry a heavy stigma because they feel that they're guilty or ashamed of how things turned out. And that becomes a huge barrier to getting help because people don't want to show their stuff outside of the home. So stigma plays a big role in that. Denial, it's been a sweet topic for me as well too, denial. I think a lot of times when I've asked folks to describe denial, they see it as, they usually phrase it as something like lying to yourself and others. That's the most common answer I get. Actually, that there is some conscious denial. Sometimes people are very consciously lying to protect themselves. But just like an iceberg, that's just the tip of the iceberg. The larger part is this subconscious psychological defense that's triggered by some perceived threat. The individual feels like someone's trying to get at them or trying to take something away from them, like their drug of choice. And it activates certain thoughts and behaviors that fit this whole structure of denial. And we're going to see, I think I have Gorski's patterns here. Oh yeah, one other point I want to make about denial before we look at Gorski stuff. If you believe, as I just said earlier, that substance use disorders are progressive, so over time they get worse and worse, it's my contention that denial has to get worse and worse to block out all those signs that things are bad. So what I'm showing in there is I don't expect anyone to read that small fine print unless you have microscopic eyes. This is the Jellinek chart to the right, and it shows the progression of alcoholism. And I'm not going to go over each symptom, but higher up on the upper left is just someone in early stage. And over time, the symptoms become much worse. So what might start out as their first blackouts or even increased tolerance, over time they start having experienced loss, job loss, family dysfunction, all those horrible things that happens during the slide into despair that substance use disorders may give. So it's my contention that it's one thing to block out your awareness that you're drinking more versus your awareness that you've already lost 3 jobs and 2 marriages. So the denial actually gets stronger and stronger over time, and in many ways becomes more insidious with this escalating dysfunction. Certainly in my many years in treatment, I heard all too many times people kind of think like, oh, no, everything's okay. I just got to cut down a bit, and all those kinds of things. And that's just a sign of denial. I'm okay. I'm really okay. I was just going through a bad time. So that's, also I want to make the comment. And by the way, I just put this slide in about 3 hours ago. This morning, I woke up thinking, oh, there's a couple things I want to say. Denial can also lead to lying even when it doesn't seem necessary. And by the way, this is not just about substance use disorders. Some of us certainly may find ourselves saying something that we know is untrue, but it just comes out of our mouth in a reaction. And I want to tell you a brief story. I can't spend much time on it because I know time's limited this morning. But I have a story that a patient told me years ago that I think captures this very well about how lying is sometimes a default position. I was working at a hospital in Northside, and St. Joseph's Hospital. And I was talking about denial, about how sometimes it's this automatic response that just comes out of you. And Sam said, I got to tell you this story. So he was in our morning IOP program where you're just in from 9 to 12. He was working, but he got a leave of absence. So he was able to come to treatment in the morning, and in the afternoon, he'd just go home and kind of chill while his wife was at work. And this was going to be about a 5-week program for him. So one day after treatment in the morning, he was home just reading the paper, and his wife called, a little chit chat. And she said, oh, did you pick up the mail yet? And what came right out of his mail was, oh yeah, sure. Did he pick up the mail yet? No, but he said he did. So a natural next question from her is, oh, was there anything important in the mail? Now what does he do? He can't say yes because he doesn't know if there's anything important in the mail. So his next step, he has to say, no, there wasn't anything important. So they finish up the discussion, blah, 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 hang up the phone, and of course he goes to check the mail. Now here's the $64,000 question for you old timers out there might remember the TV show. What happens if he gets the mail and finds there is some important things in there? What do you do? And I would ask a room full of patients this question, and I'd get answers such as, well, I'd hide it for a day. I like put it in a drawer somewhere and bring it out the next day because I already said there wasn't anything important. So that was one. Some people would say, oh, well, I'll put it in one of those flyers that you get that, you know, and say, well, it probably got lost in there. So here, I found it. So you become a hero somehow. And I actually had people say, I would rip it up and throw it away because they would rather just lose this thing than be caught in a lie. And that, I think, shows a subconscious decision on their part. And then it's a decision made in a nanosecond, so it's even hard to call it a decision. It's a reaction, not a decision. That's probably better to say. So I love this story that Sam told me. This story goes back at least 10 years of my life, and it really stays fresh with me. So I talked with Sam afterwards about, well, what do you think was going on? I mean, maybe there was some kind of reason for the lie, and it took us a while to get there, but he felt guilty that he was at home just reading the paper while his wife was at work. And this is a big trigger thing for him. This was not his first time in treatment. So he's feeling like, oh, he's being irresponsible, just sitting around doing nothing while his wife works. So of course he could go at least check the mail, because that protected his self-image of who he was, and maybe lessen the idea of an argument with his wife in the future. So this denial becomes expansive, where it wasn't even about his use anymore. It was about whether you go get the mail. And that's tricky to understand about denial, because that shows how much it runs deep and becomes an automatic response. I hope you get that. If there's any questions about that story, we can talk about it later. So families can deny problems because of stigma, because of the emotional pain that they feel if they try to accept that this is going on in their life. Fear of making the problem worse, leading into arguments that might either get violent or loud, or people leaving home and all those kinds of things. The 3 rules that we talk about the family, that we've talked about since, 80s, I suppose. Don't talk, don't trust, don't feel, all tie into this about denial, because the feelings are too painful. You don't want to get into them. You can't trust anyone because things are always changing. There's this chaos. How can you trust someone with all the lying going on? And it's better just not to talk about it. Keep it inside. Don't broadcast to anyone else about what's going on, not even in your own family. And keep in mind that denial can be intergenerational, just as substance use disorders and mental health disorders can be intergenerational. These patterns move from generation to generation. A book that I loved back in the 80s, which I don't know if it's even published anymore, was written by Ann Smith from Pennsylvania, called Grandchildren of Alcoholics. And her point was that while we've seen alcoholism occur in families from generation to generation, sometimes it seems to skip a generation. And she suggested why that may happen is because if someone's raised in an alcoholic family, they may grow up thinking, there's no way I'm going to let that happen in my family when I start raising kids. So they start raising kids and they don't drink. There's not a bottle around, but they have the same dysfunctional patterns of raising kids as they grew up with. It's all they knew. So it pops up anew. There's still denial patterns going on, even though the use isn't going on. So keep in mind, that's another way of family denial. Excuse me. I've got water, I've got tea. I'm going to keep my throat going here. Terry Gorski identified actually about 24 different denial patterns. I just want to, in the interest of time, highlight a few of those. Minimization, you're certainly well aware of. People minimize the how much they use or the frequency of their use. They can compare themselves to others. Well, yeah, I drink, but I'm not as bad as Charlie. Charlie is the one who's probably got a problem, not me. Compliance can be a form of denial as well, where, and I certainly see this in clinical situations a whole lot, where people just go along and agree to do what the counselor asks them to do, but really do it half-heartedly at best, and just really go through the motions. Hopelessness can really be a form of denial too, where they kind of say, there's no hope for me. I might as well go on. I've been in treatment now 3 times. I'm a 3-time loser. So just leave me alone. Let me finish my life. That's a form of denial, because they're denying that they have the potential to change their lives. And I think everyone has the potential to change their lives. Yes, many people have more obstacles than others, but the potential is there. The one that I want to spend a little more time on is flight into health. Some of you may have seen this. It's as people, especially you see this a lot in treatment settings, as people start having a period of being drug-free, they start feeling better. They're no longer taking a substance that their body has to react to, and they may start feeling healthier physically, maybe even emotionally. Maybe they're starting to get even some pats on the back for how well they're doing, 4 weeks into treatment. hey, you haven't drank in a month. That's great. You got a month. May hear that, if they get a 1 month coin, all those kinds of things, they start feeling great. And another form of denial is kind of saying, well, when I came into treatment, I was a mess. I was out of control. Yeah, I was using a lot. And now that I'm not using, I'm pretty good. So, I probably can handle this now. I'm okay now. So if you're okay, why do you need to do those kinds of things that your counselor suggests, like going to meetings or seeing a therapist or journaling or all those kinds of things? And they start feeling like they're great. And by feeling they're great and stopping to do some of these things that help them feel great, it's only a matter of time before the bottom falls out for them. There's a direct parallel to this also in mental health, especially around people with depression. If they're on antidepressants for a while, it often takes a while for that to take its effect. And they can get to the point when they are feeling better, when there's more clarity in their life, they feel a little more energy, they're feeling like they're doing okay now. Well, I guess I can stop my antidepressants. And unfortunately, in many cases, they don't tell anyone, including their doctor, that they stopped, and the depression comes back full speed. So that flight into health is one form of denial that when I've talked with patients, they didn't quite know as a form of denial, but I always wanted them on guard for that because I think it leads to many relapses. All the more reason to keep in mind that definition from SAMHSA. It's a process of change. It's just not an event. It's a process of change. And you have to watch out thinking it's over before it's over. So those are some of the denial patterns. Whoop. Trauma. Someone I think mentioned that is an obstacle. And it's a big one. It really is. Trauma and substance use disorders go hand in hand in so many different ways. Certainly domestic violence is an easy example of that. As a matter of fact, when I first worked in the field, like I said, in '79, in the hospital I was working in, we believed that there was maybe a small percentage of our population. We had a 21-bed unit. We thought at any given time, maybe 10% of the population had trauma in their backgrounds. And we were thinking of either domestic violence or the next one, survivors of child abuse, or because it was 1979, we were looking at Vietnam vets. And we figured that was about 10%. Well, that was 1979 into the early 80s. Since that time, we've come to recognize that people who are in treatment centers or even seeking therapy, when you start looking at their percentages of the population who have trauma in their background, probably looking more in the range of 75 to maybe even 100% of people have had trauma in their backgrounds. And it goes through all these kinds of things that I just mentioned, including child abuse and neglect. A very important tool is the ACEs tool, Adverse Childhood Experiences Survey, helped us come to recognize how much is in people's backgrounds. Accidents, and there can be all kinds of accidents. I shared with Nancy before you all came on that right before Thanksgiving, my wife and I were in a head-on collision on an icy road that inflated the airbags, and it was traumatic. My wife, who suffered a cracked sternum and cracked ribs, is still anxious and going in the car. She has not driven a car since, but even riding in the car, and it's a different car now, by the way. There's a silver lining. I don't have that car anymore. So accidents, overdoses, and overdoses of either the individual who's actually overdosing or people using with friends and witnessing an overdose. That's traumatic. And, going back to family members, the fear of overdose is traumatic too, as in this age of fentanyl, and fentanyl showing up in all kinds of different substances, family members very often fear the An overdose can happen any night. So all those things could be traumatic. Once again, I'll ask you to type some things into chat about any other forms of trauma that might be common to people with substance use disorders or their families. And I'll take a moment to drink some water.
They've already read ahead: repeated job loss, suicide of family or friends, bankruptcy,
Oh,
loss
yeah.
of love and emotional support, legal involvement, mental health issues, homelessness, suicide again.
Yeah.
Oh,
I'm
loss of a child due to addiction.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's incredible. And then one
Yeah.
more I'll include that I almost put on this list, but I thought would pop up from the participants: incarceration. People who are incarcerated have traumatic experiences, even leading up to the incarceration or being even locked
Legal
up.
issues have been mentioned a couple of times, but not specific to
Incarceration.
incarceration
Yeah,
itself.
yeah. So
Veterans.
yeah, so keep that in mind. I'm glad people can see, what's going on in the chat, because that fleshes out this slide. I don't want to shortchange this, but trauma comes in so many different forms. The impact of trauma on the family is fear and anxiety dominate all their interactions. I talk about the emotional climate, what do people in the family feel? What are acceptable feelings and stuff? Well, when there's so much fear and anxiety, it really shuts down the feelings. Go back to that, don't talk, don't trust, don't feel. So it dominates the emotional climate. Hypervigilance comes as people have experienced this, so they're on guard throughout the day. It's like an early warning device. I used to give the example of, especially with kids, because I worked with kids even before coming into the field of alcoholism counseling. I worked with emotionally disturbed kids from 75 to 79. And, kids can get to the point, if they grew up in a chaotic household, I could see them, these was emotionally disturbed kids in residential treatment, I can see them always on guard, sort of checking out what chaos might spring out from whatever corner. So, it keeps you in a hyper alert state, which is actually physically not good for you either. So hypervigilance is part of that. Trauma tends to also give a diminished view of what the future could hold for you. If things have been bad, that's your trend. You think things are going to stay bad. That's pretty common. Depression, deep depression can come from trauma, or sometimes emotional numbing. It's not that you feel bad, you don't feel anything at all. Because it's at some point, and this sounds like a rational choice. I don't mean it as rational. It's more like a reaction again. If all the feelings are so horrible, you get to the point where you'd rather feel nothing than feel anything at all. And I've already mentioned that the 3 family rules apply here too, with trauma in the family. Don't talk about. Yeah, go ahead, please.
I just want to comment. There was a last comment that I think is important looking at this, that racism and discrimination is a big trauma issue too.
Absolutely. Absolutely. As a matter of fact, that tie in nicely with the incarceration piece. My 5 years as deputy director at TASC, that was from 98 to 2003. I worked with men and women coming out of Illinois Department of Corrections, coming back into their communities. And because they had drug convictions, they couldn't, and if their family lived in public housing, they couldn't go home to their families.
Right.
So they were already blocked out. And that was really kind of a very racist view. So it really added further trauma to families. And also then that's when the questions started appearing more and more on job applications. Have you ever been incarcerated? Have you ever been diagnosed with a substance use disorder? And it really becomes piling on. So racism in the history of our government, in our whole culture, not just government, it's been there for a long time, but it's manifested itself so many different ways in recent decades. So yeah, thanks for adding to that. That's a very important point. I currently, in that men's organization I'm part of, I'm on a DEI committee. So it's something we're working very closely to try to reverse even in our own organization. Unresolved grief. As I said, I've been studying this a lot more in recent years. Pardon the cough. I do think that just as we talked about trauma, grief is closely related to it. It's kind of like they're siblings. Because I think trauma sets off a lot of different kinds of losses. Both of these things, grief and trauma, influence how we think, how we feel, and therefore how we interact with other people. And some of these losses are on the right-hand side of the PowerPoint slide. Could include, you know, when people are in families that have gotten dysfunction in their life because of substance uses, there's kind of a loss of innocence. You know, there's this sense that it's not the happy family, everything's okay. It's really recognizing that there's trouble here. We can't talk about it. We can't feel. We can't trust. So you lose that sense of growing up. Well, wonderful story that Claudia Black used to tell. I don't know if she still tells. She worked with a 10-year-old girl who took on a lot of parental responsibilities because of parental alcoholism in the family. And she actually, at 10 years old in her room, created a day-by-day flip chart to show what responsibilities she had every day after school, like washing dishes, doing the laundry, all of that. And because she also realized she was just a 10-year-old girl, she'd put in like 1 hour of playtime. And that story has already stuck with me. I heard that story at least 30 years ago. And it really kind of shows how being the pseudo adult and stepping up in that, she never really had a childhood. A child needs more than an hour of playtime a day. So that loss of innocence, loss of healthy boundaries because of the chaos in the family, loss of personal safety. We already talked about domestic violence, child abuse, things like that. And again, this sense that there's no hope, that sense of hopelessness, because what I've got in the past and in the present, I've got no reason to believe that it's not going to be more of the same in the future. And that takes its toll on folks too. It certainly can get people feeling that they can't connect with anyone else because it's just going to be more of the same. We're almost done with the obstacles. I wanted to get through this because I know it's pretty heavy. Here's some other obstacles that I thought could be added to the list, as well as the ones you already put in chat earlier. Multiple family members with the disorders. I just mentioned, when both parents are caught up in substance use disorders, it has, I think, more than double impact on children. Multi-generational, especially multi-generation families. Going back to the issue of race and racism, we can take a look at cultural pain that goes from generation to generation, especially when we take a look at Native Americans and the genocide that they've experienced over the years. And that's part of their DNA, if you will. That might be overstated, but it's part of their history anyway. I also think an obstacle is rigidity in recovery, thinking that there's only one way to recover. And that's a very important topic that maybe we don't even have enough time to cover all of that. But I know when I was starting to learn how to be an alcoholism counselor, we believed that the only way that the person with the diagnosis could recover is if there was full abstinence and if they attended X number of AA meetings a week and got a sponsor. And that was the recovery path. That was it. And for family members, that meant going to X number of Al-Anon meetings, and that was it. We didn't even at that time press people to keep going to Al-Anon, but we wanted them to learn about alcoholism, go to Al-Anon. And if you go to 6 meetings, maybe you'd get it and stick around. Well, what we've come to learn in recent years is the importance of multiple pathways of recovery. As a matter of fact, maybe this is a little commercial. Nancy's going to have me come back, I think in June, to do a webinar on multi pathways of recovery. And I think that's important because, you know, recovery is such a personal choice, and what works for one person doesn't necessarily work for another. So the rigidity in recovery certainly can become problematic. So that could be an obstacle. But enough on obstacles. You know, I really wanted to keep that to within about 45 minutes, and it went on to about 55 minutes. So let's talk about the recovery side of things. Here's one of my favorite quotes. What isn't transformed is transmitted. And that fits very well with families. If we don't work toward change and the power of human transformation, those dysfunctional thoughts, feelings, behaviors get carried on to the next generation and the next generation and the next generation. So what isn't transformed is transmitted. I think I can be an example of that in many ways, of how I've really tried to change my life, or how I relate to my own kids very differently than I was related to when I grew up. So that keeps in mind. Keep in mind there are a lot of different resources for family recovery. Illinois Family Resource Center comes to mind, since Nancy is so beautifully hosting us here. And the current project of Circle of Care, which I found out about at the fall conference in Springfield a few months ago, you know, really reaching out to the kids, especially kids who have experienced significant loss and grief, trauma, and of course, any kind of substance use disorder in the family is a form of trauma as well too. So the resources there are not only about education as we're doing, but actually emotional support and peer support. Peer support for me is very, very important. So the whole range of different resources available there is definitely worth checking out. Great website too. I spent some time on the website to take a look at that. Family and individual therapy. So many years as a therapist, I have to include that one. 12-step recovery groups and other peer recovery support services, which have come to Illinois in a big way. Nancy had already suggested that she and I were mentoring some of the programs around the state. Faith communities. You know, at one point in time, like I said, when I started in this field, we really instructed our patients only for, you know, AA, and some of us said, well, I'll go back to my church. I left there and I can really get recovery there. And we used to criticize that, thinking that you really need to focus on alcoholism. And that was so wrong. I mean, because if someone can get recovery that way, I applaud them, because there's a spiritual component as well, of course, to 12-step recovery. So maybe that embracing that is exactly what they need at that point in time. So those are some of the resources that come to mind. I think I probably could include another 5, but the font would have gotten really small on this slide. So if you want to include any others that come to your mind, and some of them could be specific things like journaling, or, you know, finding new interest, or all those things, because there's a world of different possibilities out there. But write some in chat so people get an idea of other things that they can do. You know, we'll have a little tea while people type. And Nancy, if some things pop on the screen for you, let me know.
Well, there's, of course, faith, church.
Yep.
Knitting, sewing, arts, using hands. I like this one, volunteering, community service,
Yes.
giving back.
Yes, excellent. Yep. And
I'm good.
Yeah, I'm going to refer to those last few ones, especially for sort of ongoing recovery.
Yeah.
I also added a slide about characteristics of families in long-term recovery, because I don't think we talk about that enough. I mean, what does this family look like down the road? And here's just some things. I'm not saying every family looks like this, but I think it captures a little snapshot of them. Much better communicators. They've learned how to talk to one another honestly, openly, and with feeling. Healthy boundaries. Supporting one another. Patient. Please know that ongoing recovery requires patience. Not only early recovery definitely requires patience, but ongoing recovery. That sense of hope that I keep referring to is so crucial, to know that you have this hope that things are going to get better and you can do something toward that. As a matter of fact, probably another one I should have had up here with hopeful is grateful. I think families in long-term recovery are very grateful, flexible so they're not rigid, compassionate, more focused on the present, what's really happening today and where we go, and letting go of past resentments. Someone had talked about that earlier around obstacles, letting go of resentments and letting go of the fear of the future too. That's really important to get present. And I mentioned this one earlier in my own life, that I thought it was really important to develop a sense of belonging within the family and within the community. So early recovery, I've got some ideas. I've really split this somewhat arbitrarily into early recovery and more ongoing recovery, okay? So that's where we're going the next remaining time. I call this first part of it is stabilization and support. In early recovery, there's a number of things that have to get put in place. First one, I thought of reestablishing some trust. And here I'm doing a commercial for that must be Tuesday, I guess. Jerry Moe, who I Jerry worked at Hazel and Betty Ford up in Minnesota, at the mothership there while I was working in Chicago. He's a wonderful speaker. I highly recommend this. So his whole topic next Tuesday is going to be reestablishing trust. So please check that one out. I think it's very valuable to hear what he has to say. Also, families need to learn about substance use disorders and recovery to really understand this process thing. And it's more than just going to a few family night meetings. Building a support network, especially of folks who are peers, who understand what it's like to go through this, and to build some strengths from some of the despair that you had felt previously. And I also think, you heard me say how much I study and concerned about denial. Part of what you need to do in early recovery is really start reducing your own denial patterns. And I have a few other ideas on that. One is going back to that slide with Gorski's list of some different patterns. It's important to recognize your own pattern. So if you see that you tend to, we'll stick with flight into health for a minute, that as soon as someone gets into treatment, you think, oh, well, things are going to be better because they're into treatment. You're denying all the work that still needs to be done by that individual and by yourself. So you got to understand to get past that, because otherwise that's going to really keep you stuck. If you do find yourself lying without really even knowing why you lied, but poop just came out of your mouth, correct yourself. I've talked with patients a number of times to say, if that comes out and you're lying to someone, just say, I don't even know why I said that. Let me set the record straight here. Just take a moment to stop that behavior, because even stopping that behavior that you want to keep doing is a step toward getting real and authentic with yourself. So catch yourself lying and correct yourself. And then I'm a huge believer in peer groups. I said I've currently, for years, have been in 2 men's groups. And it really helps reduce those little secrets that one might keep up in their head, but it also reduces blind spots, because when you're interacting with others, others can see your stuff that you can't see. I'll change it. Others can see my stuff that I can't see. And that goes back to a old tool that, if you've been around, some of you might be familiar with this, the Johari window. Just to break this down for you, it's a great tool for not only counselors, it can be seen as a clinical tool, but just to get people's minds around how we function upstairs here. It's a 2x2 chart. As you see on the top is known to self. So what information is known to you, but then on the other side is what's known to others. So if there's something that I know about myself that all of you know too, like I got a lot of bookshelves behind me, that's open information. That's boom, that's there. Now there's maybe some stuff that I know about myself that you don't know about me, and I'm not going to tell you because those are my hidden secrets. So that's in that box, lower left hand. When we go to the other side, there might be some things that you see about me that I don't see about myself. And I can't tell you what they are right now because I don't know what you see in me that I don't see in myself. But those are our blind spots. And, one way to even look at denial is, we're not aware of our blind spots. We shove some things away that we don't see. And it takes someone else to see it and give us that feedback. And now there are also this lower right-hand box, things that I don't know about myself and others don't know about me. And in this case, they've listed it as unknown. In some of these copies of the Jellinek chart, they have identified it as shadow or the dark side. And we all have a shadow. We all project certain things to the world and have something back in our heads. Well, it's really important to sometimes as recovery, get in touch with that shadow side and be able to understand how that it's also part of our lives. So that's the Jellinek, the Johari window. I was also realizing as I put this is another slide I put together just earlier today. I got a clip art. I realized actually this could be identified a little better. The left column is known to self. The right column is unknown to self. So they shouldn't have written it quite like that. This oversimplified it, but hopefully you see how if people are involved in a peer group, not only are they working to be more open with each other, they might start sharing some of their hidden secrets, because there's a line, of course, in recovery, we're only sick as the secrets we keep. So as we release that and let people see what we're really like, they know more information about us and they can identify our blind spots. So that's where it gets reduced somewhat. And by reducing the secrets and the blind spots, we start knowing our shadow a little bit more. So hopefully that's a useful tool for you. Building new skills. I think early recovery is very much about building new skills, learning to ask for help, getting more effective in communications, increase stress tolerance. These are coping skills, learning how to cope with stuff better, letting go of old resentments we talked about earlier. And also this idea of practicing responsiveness instead of reactivity. When people are on edge, we talked about that hypervigilance and being on edge. When you're on edge, it's a natural tendency to be reactive instead of responsive. People who are responsive really have a more calming way of going about making choices and how they're going to respond to situations. So that's a skill, and you got to practice it. Self-care, I think this is very self-explanatory, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time here. Getting good nutrition, enough rest, maintaining healthy boundaries, creating some me time, so you have some time for yourself, but also us time. Families, sometimes in early recovery, families have a hard time figuring out what's the balance of letting their loved ones go do their kind of recovery meetings and you going to do yours, but then how do we also find time to be together? You might get a family member may put too many demands on, why are you going to all those meetings, which does not help the situation. So creating that me time and us time and learning to negotiate that is also a skill, actually. Resilience. I cannot let this webinar go without talking a little bit about resilience. When I've asked people in the past about what resilience is, the number one answer I usually get is, well, you get knocked down, you get back up, you get knocked down, you get back up. It's like, well, okay, I understand that. But I found this definition that I really love. And I don't know much about Edith Rodberg. I believe that she's a clinician and a theorist, but she describes it as the capacity to deal with, learn from, and even be transformed by adversity. And I think that captures recovery so amazingly, because people really become whole other people through the grace of recovery. I had a volunteer at Hazelton who said, you know, because of recovery, I've led 2 lives. Most people only get 1. The person I've become is so different than the person I was, and I've been transformed by all that despair, but also the recovery that I did of it. And resilience is about, it's very strength-based. It's not looking at all the problems. It's looking at how you build skills, new positive attitudes, and values to keep yourself growing. And that's really important. A book that really was important to me some years ago when I read it. Some of you might be familiar with the book called Self-Compassion by Kristen Neff. She says, all too often, we are our own worst critics. You know, we judge ourselves very harshly, especially when we're feeling stuck in some kind of problem. So instead of self-criticism, which she believes only increases negativity and hopelessness, and is not, you know, some people think that if they give themselves a good talking to, somehow that's going to motivate them to change. Well, it really doesn't. Actually, it's piling on. It adds to the negativity. So she talks about 3 components of self-compassion. The first one she calls self-kindness. And this is very simply recognizing that instead of criticizing yourself, engage yourself in dialogue, inner dialogue, in a more compassionate way. You know, recognize, you know, if you had a friend going through a difficult time, what would you say to that friend? Or what would you want a friend to say to you going through that difficult time? And recognizing, instead of beating yourself up, showing some acceptance and awareness of, for example, we were talking about all these obstacles that people may face in early recovery. You know, give some recognition and respect to that, and respect and appreciate the work that you've done from that point in time. You know, some of this is about shame. You know, I mentioned this here, that negative self-talk increases shame. Tara Brach, in her book, Radical Acceptance, I think has a great way of reframing shame. Because I've worked with some clients who, when we talked about shame, they say, oh, great, now I feel ashamed that I have shame, you know, which really only doubles it up on them. So she refers to the trance of unworthiness. If we have enough self-talk in our heads that we're unworthy, we start believing it, and we fall into this hypnotic trance. So the idea is, we go back to the idea of daily affirmations, changing the tape, and that can help change our lives. Common humanity. When we're stuck in our troubles, we sometimes think no one can understand us because, you know, this is so unique to the rest of the world. This isolation only keeps us thinking that there's no hope for us, that no one, you know, gets this like we do, when in reality, everyone experiences pain. It's part of the human condition. If anything, the emotional struggles we have in our lives sort of affirms the fact that we're human beings. We've all had times in our lives that have been very difficult. So instead of running from them, recognizing that there may be other people who have experienced this too. And she's a big believer in mindfulness. Mindfulness practices, many different ones. Yoga, I started my day with about an hour of yoga today. Helps us get centered, helps us kind of bring our awareness to the present without judgment, and sort of lets go of the past and lets go of the future and just gets into the moment. So, you know, even though I've been doing training for a lot of years, before every training I feel anxious. You know, it's performance anxiety. But I got to stop that noise and get myself centered, which tends to get me right. So mindfulness is a big part of that. And I think it's a great tool for folks in early recovery. Boom. Long-term recovery. A few things on that as we're wrapping up in the last 15 minutes here. Martin Seligman, Positive Psychology. Some of you might be familiar with his work, very important work. He started out in this, understanding happiness. And then he realized, no, this is more than happiness, because happiness could be a fleeting emotional moment. The idea of pursuit of happiness doesn't mean you're going around being happy 24/7. That's not happiness. That's something else. I don't even know what that is, but that's not happiness. So he gets to the idea of what we want to pursue is a form of wellness that he calls flourish, in ways we keep growing. And I'm going to have a slide on each of these that fit this acronym PERMA. First one is positive emotion. I know I'm throwing a lot of writers and books at you, but Rick Hansen wrote a book called Buddha's Brain. And this is going to be listed on the slide at the end of the PowerPoint. And he suggests that because of this negative thinking we carry around, we tend to focus so much more on the negative. We have this negative bias. He said it's like our brains are like Velcro for negative stuff. It sticks. But our brains are also like Teflon for positive stuff. So when positive stuff happens, it just sort of slips away. So what he's suggesting is that we have to do is work on recognizing that a lot of our negative thinking doesn't even happen. We're worried about things that aren't even going to take place, but we're worried about it. So get back in the present instead of worrying about being anxious about the future. And also, when you feel something joyful, savor it. So here's an example. You savor the joys. You stick with it. So, sometimes this even fits like mindful eating. So if I can eat a tangerine and even forget that I just ate a tangerine, but if I eat it mindfully, I can really experience all the juices, the smells, the taste, all of that. That's mindful eating. But there's joys in that. Popcorn is a real good example of that too. Practice gratitude, service to others. This whole idea of paying it forward is huge to create some positive emotion, because it helps us feel, and there's another one coming about meaning, but it helps us get there. Engagement. Some of you might know this concept as flow, when you're fully immersed in an activity. Now, it's got to be the right kind of activity. There's got to be a challenge to it, but it's still a challenge within your wheelhouse, your ability to do it. But it means you really got to concentrate and get in it. I'm on the verge of getting close to publishing my first novel. It's taken me 2 years and counting. But at times I get so lost in my writing that hours flow by without me knowing it. So I lose track of time. And clearly there's a sense of reward. I've never thought I'd publish a novel. And it could happen this year. As a matter of fact, I truly am very hopeful it's going to happen this year. So that's about engagement. The R is relationships. Harvard's longitudinal study that has continued for, I forget when they started, I think it was in the 40s or 50s, recognized the most important factor in happiness across the lifespan is positive relationships. And I put up a little Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And yeah, the physiological, of course, is having a roof over your head and food and stuff like that. Safety is knowing that you can be safe. But the next thing is love and belonging. Knowing that you belong, that you love someone and someone loves you or someone's. And if you want to move toward esteem or self-actualization, you got it there. You build this from the bottom up in this pyramid. So that's part of it. Meaning, certainly meaning helps to find us. Viktor Frankl in Man's Search for Meaning talked about 3 sources of meaning: work, love, and courage during challenging times. And of course, he was a survivor of the Nazi concentration camps. So that certainly fits about courage during challenging times. I also think that there are other sources, by the way, but it captures the idea that when we get into late stage recovery, there's this sense of having some new meanings of who we are and leading to ongoing growth. Because if we change who we are, it takes us to the next level of other things we can accomplish that we never even thought we could accomplish back here. Sort of doing the next right thing a little bit there. So, oh, and one more achievement. Identity is also built on our accomplishments. It helps reduce this negative talk if we recognize we are accomplishing things in our lives, we are achieving something, and it leads us to that stepping stone of self-esteem and self-actualization. I know I'm hurrying through these last ones because I'm very aware of the time. Deeper grief work. See, I think folks can do some grief work early in recovery, but it's a slippery slope because there's so much pain there that until you have some healthy boundaries in place and some good coping skills, I don't know you can get into it quite as deep. Because you really, to do this deeper work, you need this acceptance and compassion. And let me add another one, this sense of belonging. You know, if you have developed enough peer support, you can get down, you can really get in that and share what's been going on with people who you've come to trust and love, and they trust and love you. So the deeper grief work, I think, is for ongoing recovery later on. And even when you look at the 12 steps and the spiritual principles found there, there's reasons why you don't do a whole lot of making amends within the first few steps. That there's a reason for that comes later, because you have to, you got to get a little more solid in your own work to be able to do that. Of course, when talking about grief, many are familiar with Kubler-Ross's 5 stages of grief there, so I'm not going to go over that. I do believe there's, if you don't know it, there's so much access to that online, you can check that out. But David Kessler had done some work with Kubler-Ross, and in his own work, he said that they were talking on another stage, and that was meaning. And it is only after you've reached acceptance, again, this idea that you have this new sense of who you are and find some new meaning in your life. I think that fits beautifully for late stage recovery for families. So the sense of meaning, I think I have a little more on that too. Keep in mind, people grieve in many different ways. They don't necessarily go through Kubler-Ross's stages. Whatever emotions emerge, that's okay. Be patient. If you get stuck in something, you got to really kind of talk with some others to see some idea of why you're stuck and what's going on there, to get past those stuck points. Some people are stuck for years in their grief, and that's an awful place to be. It leaves you kind of in limbo. So being able to get through that. And people grieve in a lot of different ways and heal, just as people are making those lists about different things that they can do. Like journaling and knitting and all those things. Some of that could be grief work. There's some books that say there might be some gender differences in how people grieve. Women, because they're a lot more socialized around their emotional intelligence, might be better at feeling work, while some men sometimes have to put this into action. And there's stories of how men build something to honor the person that they lost, for example. And if that works for them, beautiful, that works for them. I'm going to actually do 2 things real. I'm going to jump ahead real quick, but we're going to go back to this one. But these are the books. So this is in the PowerPoint. These are all books I mentioned. Also, if you want to know more on family recovery, there are a ton of books from the 1980s that you can look at. Claudia Black, Sharon Wig, Sherry Cruz. I mentioned Ann Smith, Grandchildren of Alcoholics. I just wanted to keep things at least within this millennium. So that's why I listed these. And then that's my contact info. That's me at the south rim of the Grand Canyon. And, but that's contact info for me. And then there's that statement about closing comments. Recovery got to be a lifelong process, an ongoing process for families as well as the individuals, because there are obstacles. This is not easy. It takes time, it takes support, It takes a willingness to keep moving forward. It takes the idea of recognizing that you're still a person who's evolving and maybe into new senses of who you are and a new sense of meaning and service to others. All those are components to that. And now I can open up, and geez, I've only asked this about 5 minutes, but any other comments or questions before we wrap up today? Anything in chat?
Somebody asked about the PowerPoint again, and yes, you can get a copy of the PowerPoint. And they want your contact posted in the chat.
Okay, well, actually, it will also be in the PowerPoint.
Yeah, it'll be that, and we can make sure that it goes out.
Yep.
Let me see what else we've got here. A lot of thank yous, of which I totally agree.
Thank you. Thanks for the opportunity, Nancy. I really appreciate this. Like I said,
I appreciate you. That's why we invited you.
Well,
and
part of my yes is because you asked me, but this is important stuff to me too.
Yeah.
It really is.
I really look forward to in June being able to really address recovery's possible and how do you do it and what are some of those avenues for it. So we will be getting that information out to you to be able to register in the next couple of months. And I just really appreciate everybody that signed on here. I find that exciting.
Yeah, 63. That's a nice turnout.
It is.
Now I'm seeing the chat since I'm out of that.
Right.
Oh, good. Someone put up the, I guess, website for self-compassion. Great work.
That.
Great work.
I think it's exciting when people put their resources into this so everybody can draw from it. That's what we need to be doing.
That's why I like using the chat. I really do, because I've often said that if I'm doing my job right, people aren't only learning from me, they're learning from each other. I want to create a learning atmosphere.
And also, if you need and want to see this information, we'll be posting it all our websites, unless Zoom screws up, goes on our page. And I put the website page in the chat a while ago.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Someone asked when the next training is. That is the Jerry Moe on
Jerry
Tuesday. Yeah.
And the one following that I will mention, because this is an incredible opportunity done by Dr. Ira Chasnoff, and it's the neurobiology of attachment, and it's got some of the most newest research about meth use during pregnancy and early childhood as it links to attachment, because they have found that meth is just about one of the most severe interruptions in attachment at birth for children that have been predisposed. So we were really fortunate to get him. He's an international known doctor, and I say join it. You aren't going to be disappointed. He's also an excellent trainer. So any other questions, you can get a hold of us. My sweater just got tied to something. There we go. So,
well, I think that's a wrap then.
I do too. Thank you, Bob, and we'll be talking soon.
Excellent, Nancy. Thank you all. Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody. I appreciate you and all the work you do.